Welcome to this next lesson, lesson 1-2. This lesson will focus on pronouns, on identification, classification, analyzing how they're used, and of course, correctly using them. Some tips for success on this lesson. Like nouns, pronouns do come in many varieties and take many different forms. You're going to be noting many different types of pronouns. Classifications of pronouns, though, unlike nouns, don't overlap nearly as much, so keep that in mind. Make sure that as you're working through this lesson, you're creating your own examples and exercises. Don't simply write down what's on the screen. That's not good studying. And also, as you're working through pronouns, review what you've learned in previous lessons. Go back to some of your notes on nouns as you work through this lesson on pronouns to start making those connections and building that broader, more sophisticated body of knowledge of grammar. Let's begin this lesson by looking once again at The Fight Between Carnival and Lent by Peter Bruegel. Last time, I went through this and we just sort of identified a bunch of the stuff that we saw in here, just looking at what we saw. And we were naming things then, but there's another way to actually identify the stuff in this painting. Yeah, instead of calling him the fat man riding the barrel, I could say he is riding this on it, for instance. And what makes this possible is our familiarity with this painting. You can see what I'm noting here. You can see the words that I'm calling your attention to. You can see what they're referring to. And so this other way of communicating substantives works. Remember back, substantives, if we're looking back at the previous lesson, are all of the stuff in our language, all the people, places, things, and concepts in our languages. Communicating substantives, though, only through nouns becomes really, really tedious when we already are familiar with the thing. After a while, referring to the fat man on the barrel sled over and over and over again becomes cumbersome. It's much easier if I can just point to him and call him that guy. Fortunately, there is another type of substantive to facilitate this, and that's pronouns. Pronouns are substantives which act as substitutes for nouns and noun phrases. They refer to them or fill in for them. He, she, us, them, this, that, none, what, all, many, few, each other. All of these are examples of pronouns, of which in total there are dozens. Pronouns are very important to our language. Otherwise, we'd have to repeat our nouns over and over again. We could not say, for example, Amy stopped by her house to ask her mom whether she could go to the movies. We would instead have to say, Amy stopped by Amy's house to ask Amy's mom whether Amy could go to the movies. It'd be far more cumbersome. Plus, we'd have to spell out lengthy literal noun phrases that, because of our familiarity with one another and with just basic aspects of humanity, we don't actually have to say. For instance, without pronouns, I couldn't say, she also asked to borrow enough money for a ticket. I'd have to say, Amy also asked to borrow an amount of money sufficient to cover the cost of a ticket. And I'd sound kind of like a space alien. Finally, pronouns can serve any function that nouns can. They can act as the subjects of clauses, as objects in clauses, as subject complements, and so on and so forth. Go ahead and take a look at the next few exercises over identifying pronouns.